When it comes to the gaming industry, controversy is no stranger. Sometimes sparked by graphic violence, sometimes by politics, and sometimes by what happens behind the scenes, including allegations of abuse. Whether it's media panic, fan outrage, or developers caught in the crossfire, the gaming world has seen more than its fair share of drama. From titles pulled off shelves for being too violent to the firestorm over Resident Evil 5's alleged racism, all the way to full-blown community meltdowns. Today we're diving into a variety of different video game controversies, where some are really serious and others are just outright absurd. Anyways, before the video fully starts, make sure to like and subscribe for a cookie. The first entry in this video is a game so violent that EA didn't even want you to play it. Unreleased games are always fascinating to me, small windows into what could have been in gaming history. Take the unreleased version of Doom 4 for example. Instead of playing as the Doomslayer, players would step into the shoes of just a regular guy surviving Hell's invasion. That game would be cancelled for multiple reasons. A lot of people online criticized the game for looking like something that was just another Call of Duty game, something the market was oversaturated with at the time. Another interesting unreleased game that faced controversy, this time from its own publishers, is Thrill Kill. And as a fun nod, it also features Hell, just like the previously mentioned cancelled Doom game. Thrill Kill was set for release in 1998, just 5 years after Mortal Kombat shook the world with its pixelated blood and fatalities. But Thrill Kill wanted to outdo all of that. It was a 3D 4-player fighting game, loaded with violent, bizarre, and hypersexualized characters. The game had a really colorful cast to say the least, and among them a dominatrix librarian, or if you wanted you could play as the Imp, who uses stilts to reach people's heights. However, now trapped in hell, he uses his stilts to fight others, and also has a leather daddy outfit.
Jesus Christ.
With 8 playable characters and 4 unlockables, Thrill Kill centers on damned souls sent to hell who are given a chance at reincarnation by the mysterious goddess of secrets. The only way to earn the chance is by brutally killing the other participants. Instead of a health bar, the game had a kill meter. The more damage you dished out, the faster it filled. Once full, you could unleash a brutal finisher called a Thrill Kill. Similar to Mortal Kombat's fatalities, but even more depraved for the time. And keep in mind, this was in the 90s when games like Doom was still catching flack for containing satanic imagery, and Resident Evil was under fire for its gore. Surprisingly, Thrill Kill didn't even start as a horror fighter. It began as Earth Monster, a concept involving Mesoamerican warriors competing in an Aztec-style ball game. But then Virgin Interactive, the game's original publisher, urged the developers to amp up the violence, hoping controversy would add hype around the game, which to no one's surprise worked. By the time Thrill Kill was showcased at E3 1998, it became one of the most talked about games at the event. A sequel was already being discussed. The game was 99% complete. It was primed to be a massive hit, so what stopped it? EA acquired Virgin Interactive that same year and inherited publishing rights to Thrill Kill. After reviewing the nearly finished game, EA made a hard stop. They refused to release it. The game in their view was just too violent. EA's decision effectively killed what could have been one of the most controversial bestsellers of the late 90s. There was even reportedly a marketing plan to send Thrill Kill demo discs to anti-video game violence activists, essentially trolling them into talking about it. But EA's acquisition ended all of that, simply because they didn't want to risk facing negative public backlash. Rather than waste a nearly finished engine, the developers reskinned Thrill Kill into Wu-Tang Shaolin style, a less extreme but still stylish fighting game, now released by Activision. The results? Mixed reviews, not terrible, but nowhere near the hype that surrounded Thrill Kill. And for the original devs, the change left a bitter taste, especially considering their hard work and bold creative choices. There were even content changes in Wu-Tang Shaolin style for sensitivity reasons. For example, the character based on Old Dirty Bastard was going to use a drunken master fighting style, but executives axed it in order to avoid glorifying alcoholism. But with the game being 99% complete, there has to exist some way to play the game, right? While the game never saw an official release, a leaked version of the game would emerge online, allegedly by a frustrated developer. Today, you can still find Thrill Kill bootlegs floating around the internet, playable via PlayStation emulators. Ever since then, the game has gained a respectable sized cult following. It's crazy to think that a game that was predicted to make millions of dollars in 1998 is now being passed around as abandonware. But that's the legacy of Thrill Kill, a game so violent EA got cold feet. And now we'll be looking at a really strange controversy, the racism controversy around Resident Evil 5. Earlier Resident Evil games were often criticized for their gore and violence, content that by today's standards seems relatively tame, especially when compared to the modern remakes. But one particular Resident Evil entry sparked controversy not for its blood or monsters, but for something deeper and more culturally charged. And no, it wasn't the infamous boulder punching scene, or the fact that Chris Redfield now looked like he could bench press a car. Set in the fictional African region of Kijuju, Resident Evil 5 cast players as either Chris Redfield or Sheva Alomar, introducing co-op gameplay for the first time in the main series. The story centers on stopping a bioweapon from being sold on the black market, but as players move through the game, they find themselves shooting wave after wave of infected African villagers, who often charge at the player with spears or machetes, and you can see where this controversy stemmed from. I mean, watching a muscular white guy gun down infected African villagers in a poverty-stricken area is going to raise some eyebrows. A few people did see it as problematic. One of the earliest and most vocal critiques came from Kikizo, a UK-based gaming website known in the 2000s for its sharp editorial voice and early access coverage. A Kikizo writer previewing the game called out a particular scene where a white woman is dragged away by a mob of infected black villagers. He wrote, "The scene dovetails smoothly with that classic racist trope of the brutal black male corrupting the white man's womenfolk. There's zero justification for the woman's appearance in the plot. The scene exists, as far as I can see, purely to outrage and titillate players, whose cultural background is saturated with such unwholesome ideas." In response to the controversy, Kikizo reached out to the British Board of Film Classification, or BBFC for short, the UK's equivalent of the ESRB in the United States, tasked with assigning age-based ratings for video games and films. After reviewing the material, BBFC Head of Communications Sue Clark issued a statement clarifying the board's position. As the whole game is set in Africa, it is hardly surprising that some of the characters are black, just like the fact that some of the characters in an earlier version were Spanish as the game was set in Spain. We do take racism very seriously, but in this case, there is no issue around racism. And of course, the gaming community shared their opinions. Some users echoed Kikizo's concern, pointing out the visual optics and the uncomfortable historical undertones. Others pushed back, noting that Resident Evil 4 had you fighting infected Spanish villagers in rural Spain, and no such controversy erupted then. If that setting didn't spark outrage, why should an African setting? One of my favorite common retorts that came from online is that if most Resident Evil games take place in a different country, should Americans feel offended when the nukes are dropped in Raccoon City? The Binding of Isaac is a roguelike indie video game developed by Edmund McMillan, best known for Super Meat Boy and Florian Himzel. It was published by Nicholas and initially released in 2011. The game quickly gained a strong following for its unique roguelike design, featuring randomized levels and challenging gameplay. Even now, the series boasts a thriving community thanks to countless mods. However, due to the game's religious symbolism and its publisher's blunt personality, The Binding of Isaac would eventually find itself at the center of controversy. If you're familiar with biblical stories, the title itself, The Binding of Isaac, is a direct reference to the story of Abraham and his son Isaac, where God commands Abraham to sacrifice his son to test his faith. Inspired by that narrative, the game is about a scared little boy named Isaac, whose mother believes she must kill him in order to prove her devotion to God. And the game really kicks off when Isaac escapes into the basement of their house, eventually descending deeper and deeper, fighting enemies along the way while using his tears as a weapon. And very obviously, the game is filled with a lot of religious references. Characters like Judas, Cain, and Lazarus are clear nods to the Hebrew Bible and the Old Testament. Items such as the Bible used for flight or to instantly kill the mom boss. And the Dead Sea Scrolls, which activate random item effects, are based on Christian concepts. Unsurprisingly, one major platform holder thought this whole entire thing about religion went way too far. The Nintendo 3DS was a handheld console released in 2011, famous for its glasses-free 3D display. I personally thought it was like one of the coolest concepts until I actually saw it in person and wasn't really all that impressed. Still, after collaborating with Nicholas, The Binding of Isaac was slated for release on the 3DS in 2012. Given its popularity at the time, it could have easily made a lot of money, but Nintendo blocked the game from launching on their system due to questionable religious content. For many Nintendo fans, this wasn't a shock. The company has long maintained a conservative stance on violence, religion, and child abuse. Topics The Binding of Isaac has in abundance. Still, it seemed inconsistent. You could play Manhunt, a game so violent it was banned in countries like Australia, Ireland, and Italy on the Wii. Despite months of discussion and development, the game was ultimately shut out. Macmillan, while frustrated, took it in stride. "There was no rug pulled out from under me. A lot of people are saying you should be pissed because you lost money. No, I didn't lose money. I didn't start in on development before I got the yes or no. I wasn't doing shit. No one was doing anything. We were just waiting for Nintendo to respond." On why the game was really rejected, Macmillan didn't hold back. Here's why Nintendo said no. Go to any website that talked about it and read the comments, and look at the religious wars that happened in it. That's why they rejected the game, because people are too stupid to realize their opinions are isolated to themselves and don't apply to others. The end. Fuck off. But Nintendo wouldn't be the only company to reject The Binding of Isaac. In 2016, Apple blocked The Binding of Isaac Rebirth from the App Store, citing that the game contains content depicting violence toward or abuse of children. This time, Nicholas founder Tyrone Rodriguez responded, tweeting a screenshot of Apple's rejection with a caption, "Come on, WTF Apple." It's a weird stance considering Apple allowed games like Telltale's The Walking Dead, where the child character Clementine is often in life-threatening situations. Neither game features direct violence toward children as gameplay mechanics. Instead, players are typically trying to protect them. Still, Isaac got the boot. But things were about to get much worse for Nicholas. In 2019, Tyrone Rodriguez, founder of Nicholas, became the subject of very serious controversy following allegations of racism, abuse, and exploitative behavior within the company. Founded in 2007 and based in Santa Ana, California, Nicholas had gained a strong reputation for publishing and porting successful indie titles, including Cave Story and The Binding of Isaac Rebirth. But behind the scenes, the company's internal culture was far from the polished image it projected. In 2015, game designer David Crooks, working on Enter the Gungeon, was seeking support for console ports of the game. He crossed paths with Tyrone and eventually signed a non-disclosure agreement with Nicholas, even handing over the game's source code. Things looked promising until Tyrone ghosted him. Calls and emails went unanswered, and the port deal fell apart. And Crooks wasn't alone. Kotaku's article, Inside the Ghosting, Racism, and Exploitation at Game Publisher Nicholas, revealed multiple similar accounts of ghosting. 4 external developers, speaking anonymously, shared stories of being ghosted by Tyrone after signing deals. Former Nicholas employees accused Tyrone of being a toxic boss, saying he often pressured staff to drink, made racist jokes both in person and on Skype, which were published in the article, and fostered a hostile work environment. One employee in particular was targeted for his weight by Tyrone. Tyrone would constantly berate him and tell him to go on walks. On a business trip to Japan with Tyrone and his brother Victor Rodriguez, then CEO of Nicholas, the employee's thighs began bleeding from excessive walking. Hoping to rest at the hotel, he declined when the Rodriguez brothers asked if he wanted to walk to a nearby landmark. When he pointed out to his injured legs, Tyrone reportedly snapped, "Who do you think paid for your trip?" The employee was fired after returning home. Numerous other stories emerged, sparking similar stories of mistreatment, sparking massive backlash aimed towards Tyrone. Edmund Macmillan, creator of The Binding of Isaac, eventually cut ties with Nicholas, and when asked for comment, he said he was never close with Tyrone. They simply just published his games. When Kotaku reached out for interviews, a Nicholas spokesperson issued a standard PR response, denying any abusive workplace culture and claiming to work toward a respectful environment. Tyrone tried to salvage his image with this Twitter apology. I wrote some terribly insensitive, stupid remarks in DMs that don't represent who I am. Just because they were done in a private situation while trying to be funny and edgy doesn't make them any less terrible. They're indefensible and unacceptable. As someone who has experienced racism and discrimination in my life, I should know better and must be a better person. I can't throw around words for shock value or because I think they'll get a laugh. I want to also clarify that my insensitivity and vulgarity shouldn't reflect on the people I work with. They're very good people and shouldn't be held responsible for my own actions. If I've hurt you and I wasn't aware until today that I might have, I hope you can forgive me someday. And with Tyrone's apology, many felt it was too little, too late. Despite everything, Tyrone never officially stepped down. And even more surprisingly, in 2022, Edmund McMillen once again worked with Nicholas to bring The Legend of Boombo to consoles. I don't know if I said that right. A roguelike prequel set in the same universe as The Binding of Isaac. Despite the complicated past between McMillen and Nicholas, the 2022 console release proved the ongoing demand for McMillen's creations, bringing Bumbo to a wider audience and ensuring that his collaboration with Nicholas continued despite the controversies surrounding Tyrone. Boomer shooters are one of my favorite genres in gaming, whether it's the classics like the Doom series, or newer titles like Dusk, which pays homage to the classics with its fast-paced action and Lovecraftian undertones. Even before their resurgence, there was always a loyal audience for these games. In 2014, Paranotical Activity entered that space. Developed by the American indie studio Code Avarice, co-founded by Mike Malbec and Travis Fenning, the game mixed classic 90s FPS gameplay with roguelike elements. Fast combat, procedurally generated levels, and punishing difficulty. So how was the reception? Well, it was mixed. Critics praised the game's speed and nostalgic appeal, but it launched with bugs, repetitive gameplay, and unbalanced difficulty. Some players even said it looked like Minecraft, a comment aimed at the blocky enemy designs and visuals. But technical criticism wasn't the main story here. The real controversy came on the day of its full release, October 20th, 2014. The game had already been in beta on Windows for about a year, but this was its official Steam launch. However, Valve accidentally listed Paranotical Activity as an early access title. Frustrated, Mike Malbec took to Twitter and unleashed a string of angry tweets directed at Steam. "Are you kidding me, Steam? We just released out of early access and this is our front page banner. First they forced me to delay the game because they can't release on weekends, now this. Steam is the most incompetent piece of..." Calling out Steam isn't unusual. People have criticized its moderation and quality control for years, but issuing a death threat, even sarcastically, is a different story. One tweet in particular escalated the situation dramatically. In a now deleted tweet, "I'm going to kill Gabe Newell. He is going to die." The next day, on October 21st, Valve responded by pulling Paranotical Activity from Steam and severing ties with Code Avarice entirely. In an attempt at damage control, Malbec posted a public apology and announced he was stepping down from Code Avarice. As a result of my actions, Paranotical Activity, a game made by 4 or 5 people, depending on who you count as team members, was removed from Steam. I feel it is my responsibility to step down from Code Avarice completely, so that Steam has no reason to harbor any more ill will towards the company. And maybe even if we can't see Paranotical Activity restored, at least future Code Avarice games may be allowed onto the platform. I'm really deeply sorry that my short-sighted, hot-tempered actions resulted in not only my own dreams and aspirations being destroyed, but those of the entire team I worked with. I'm sorry that my statements made Valve and or Gabe uncomfortable and upset, rightfully so. The apology was widely rejected. Many saw it as insincere and believed it only confirmed Malbec's immaturity. Still, a year later in 2015, he quietly rejoined the company. After struggling to find work elsewhere, Code Avarice decided to bring him back, but with precautions. From then on, any tweets from the company account had to be co-written and reviewed before posting. That same year, the rights to Paranotical Activity were sold to publishers Digerati. It was updated, patched, and re-released on Steam as Paranotical Activity Deluxe Atonement Edition, a name that might even reference Malbec's infamous outburst on Twitter. Code Avarice would go on to release more games, but Malbec's past still follows them. In 2023, they put out Paranotical TV Beatings, I think that's how you say it, to mark the 10-year anniversary of Paranotical Activity, but the reception was lukewarm at best. For better or worse, the controversy remains the most well-known part of their legacy. Set in the fictional rural town of Possum Springs, Night in the Woods follows a young cat named May, who returns home after dropping out of college. Through May's journey of reconnecting with old friends and uncovering the town's dark secrets, the game explores themes of mental health, existential dread, and economic decline, all wrapped in a visually rich, side-scrolling adventure. Sounds like a pretty comfy game. The game began as a Kickstarter project in 2013 by the indie studio Infinite Fall, composed of animator Scott Benson, writer Bethany Hockenberry, and programmer/composer Alec Holowka. Their initial funding goal of $50,000 was quickly surpassed, eventually raising over $200,000. Wow. Development progressed with minimal delays, with the team emphasizing polish and their own mental well-being. Upon its release on February 21st, 2017, Night in the Woods received widespread critical acclaim. IGN awarded it Best Adventure Game of the Year, praising its sharp writing and social commentary on the struggles of post-industrial American towns. Metacritic scores were strong across platforms, and future ports expanded its reach. Players connected deeply with the game's exploration of depression, identity, and burnout, spawning a vibrant fanbase that continues to discuss its themes to this day. The success cemented Infinite Fall's status as a breakout indie studio, but things would take a dark turn. Back in 2012, Alec Holowka had a brief relationship with indie developer Zoe Quinn, best known at the time for Depression Quest. Their relationship lasted around a month, and for years nothing public was said about it. In 2014, after the release of Depression Quest, Quinn's ex-boyfriend Aaron Joni posted a lengthy blog titled The Zoe Post, accusing Quinn of infidelity. He claimed they had cheated on him with several people, including Joshua Boggs, creator of Framed, and journalist Nathan Grayson of Kotaku. The post implied that Quinn has slept with Grayson for favorable coverage, despite the fact that Grayson never wrote a review of Depression Quest. Then in 2019, amid the rising tide of the #MeToo movement in gaming, Quinn came forward with serious abuse allegations against Alec Holowka, inspired in part by Nathalie Lawhead's accusation against Skyrim composer Jeremy Soule. Quinn shared a series of tweets describing Holowka as emotionally abusive and manipulative during their brief time living together. In response, Infinite Fall's remaining members Scott Benson and Bethany Hockenberry announced they had cut ties with Holowka and cancelled an in-progress project. The response was swift and widespread. Many people supported Quinn's account, others were less kind. In just a few days after the allegations were made public, Alec Holowka died by Eileen Mary Holowka confirming his death on Twitter. In the aftermath, Quinn received a new wave of backlash, with some online accusing them of pushing Holowka to take his own life. Accusations that quickly escalated into death threats and calls of murderer. Holowka's sister, Eileen, defended Quinn and urged people not to weaponize their family's grief. Quinn deactivated their Twitter account and has since then maintained a low public profile. As for Infinite Fall, the studio quietly dissolved. In 2024, Scott Benson confirmed the cancellation of Revenant Hill, citing health issues among team members. The team stepped away from game development, leaving behind Night in the Woods as their final completed work. A project beloved by many, yet overshadowed by tragedy. If you haven't heard of Five Nights at Freddy's, where have you been? The phenomenon around this series is just completely wild and huge. And I'm pretty sure I practically grew up with the series. What started off as a simple point-and-click horror game, developed by one man, Scott Cawthon, quickly grew into an absurdly popular franchise. There were multiple games, spin-offs, piles of merch, and eventually a full-length feature film. The gameplay was simple but effective. Created creating constant tension between the player and the animatronics. But what really hooked people was the lore. Some videos analyzing the story go on for several hours and rack up millions of views. Clearly, the fan base is massive. And yet, just as the franchise hit peak popularity, Scott Cawthon retired from game development altogether for reasons that surprised a lot of people. Before FNAF took over the internet, Scott Cawthon had always been a devout Christian, raised in Texas, and his faith heavily influenced both his personal life and his early work. He created several Christian-themed projects, like the 2010 JRPG The Pilgrim's Progress, and contributed to Hope Animation, a collaborative effort by Christian animators and programmers to spread the gospel. Through these projects, Cawthon honed his skills in storytelling, 3D modeling, and animation. It's kind of crazy to think that just a few years later, this guy would be the same guy to create one of the most horrifying franchises. Well, at least horrifying to me whenever I play the games. Before Five Nights at Freddy's, Cawthon worked on a range of indie games. Some with religious themes, some not. One of those was There Is No Pause Button, a mobile game released on Android, iOS, and Windows. At the time, Cawthon was struggling financially, trying to support his wife and 2 kids. He hoped that making free-to-play and budget-friendly games would be his breakthrough. In 2013, he released Chipper & Sons Lumber Company, a cheerful management game about a young beaver learning the family trade. But despite its family-friendly vibe, players thought the characters looked off. Some even said that they resembled creepy animatronics. Cawthon took the criticism hard. Already in a tough financial spot, the backlash pushed him into a depressive state. But instead of giving up, he leaned into the criticism and decided to make something that was intentionally scary. So he embraced the animatronic horror people joked about. And on August 8th, 2014, Five Nights at Freddy's was born. The game quickly gained traction thanks to YouTubers like Markiplier and PewDiePie, whose over-the-top reactions helped the game go viral. The success was explosive. Just 3 months after the first release, a sequel dropped. Then another, and another. Over the next few years, FNAF became a household name, spawning an ever-growing number of entries and an incredibly dedicated fanbase. While it's not on the level of something quite like Mario or Pokemon, it absolutely carved out its place in pop culture. Eventually, a new major installment was planned, this time a first-person horror game where players could move around freely, in what was loosely described as an open world. That game was Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach. Cawthon greenlit the project and handed development off to Still Wool Studios, while he stayed involved behind the scenes, helping finance the game and serving as a producer. He took on more of a background role, but a few months before Security Breach launched in December 2021, Cawthon would retire from the public eye altogether. In June 2021, fans on Twitter discovered that Scott Cawthon had made several political donations to Republican politicians, including Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell. At the time, a large portion of FNAF's fanbase consisted of young, LGBTQ+ friendly players, many of whom were vocal about their disappointment. The backlash was swift, but it also sparked debate, because to some, Cawthon's conservative views weren't exactly a shock. He was, after all, a devout Christian from Texas. And while some fans were angry, others empathized. He had, after all, spoken out against NFTs due to their environmental impact, and he'd consistently hired diverse talent for his projects. But the controversy spiraled, and eventually Cawthon posted a lengthy statement on Reddit. It wasn't quite an apology, more like a personal farewell. To say that the last few days have been surreal would be an understatement. I've debated greatly how to best address this, including not addressing it at all. But with so many people from the LGBT community and the fan base that I love, that's not an option. I'd like to think that the last 7 years would have given me the benefit of doubt in regards to how I treat people, but there I was, trending on Twitter for being a homophobe, getting doxxed with people threatening to come to my house. My wife is 6 weeks pregnant, and she spent last night in fear because of what was being said online. She has already been struggling with her pregnancy, so seeing her so afraid really scared me. All this because I exercised my right and my duty as an American citizen to vote for and support the candidates who I felt could best run the country. unnecessary for everyone, and that's something that I won't apologize for. And yes, I supported President Trump because I felt he was the best man to fuel a strong economy and stand up to America's enemies abroad, of which there are many. Even if there were candidates who had better things to say to the LGBT community directly and bigger promises to make, I believe that their stances on other issues would have ended up doing much greater harm to those communities than good. All of this explanation, I fear, is wasted, as people don't want to discuss with one another anymore. They want endless apologies and submission. People who are expecting those from me will get neither. I've always been supportive of creators and have tried to treat everyone fairly and treat everyone with dignity and respect. I never cared about anyone's race, religion, gender, or orientation. I just treat people as people, everyone the same, and because of that, I've ended up with a very diverse group of people that I've worked with over the years. If I get cancelled, then I get cancelled. I don't do this for the money anymore. I do it because I enjoy it. If people think I'm doing more harm than good now, then maybe it's better that I get cancelled and retire. I would accept that. I've had a fulfilling career. Besides, most things that people can take from you are things that never had much value to begin with. I have always loved and will continue to love this community and this fan base, even if someday it doesn't include me anymore. Cawthon stepped down shortly after. He still owns the FNAF IP and has remained involved behind the scenes, most recently as co-writer and co-producer of Blumhouse's live-action Five Nights at Freddy's movie. The community, despite the controversy, is still thriving. New entries keep coming, fan theories continue to evolve, and Cawthon himself has kept a low public profile, focused on family life and quietly expanding the universe he created. He may no longer be the face of the franchise, but in many ways, FNAF is still very much his story. A strange, unsettling world that started with one man's failures and ended up changing horror gaming forever. From graphic content to serious allegations, it seems like controversies are never going to be able to leave the gaming scene. Some, like abuse or exploitation, raise really serious questions. Others, like the Resident Evil 5 controversy, feel like they missed the mark completely. In Resident Evil 2, you shoot down American zombies. Resident Evil 4, you shoot down Spanish zombies. And it seems to be an issue in Resident Evil 5 where you're in Africa and you shoot down African zombies. But of course, there are always going to be really serious controversies where most of them stem from allegations. As the industry grows and public scrutiny intensifies, one question still hangs in the air. Can some people truly separate the game from its creators, such as in Scott Cawthon's case? I mean, obviously the answer in Scott Cawthon's case is yes, because the franchise of Five Nights at Freddy's is still growing. Anyways, before this video ends, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I spent a lot of time making it, and if you're still here, make sure to like and subscribe. Anyways, this has been Keen, and I'll see you all later.